Psychology of people who don't miss anyone. There's a sentence that sounds simple, almost casual, but quietly unsettles people when they hear it. I don't really miss anyone. In American culture, that line lands heavy. Missing someone is treated as proof of love, depth, and emotional health. So when someone says they don't feel it, the reaction is immediate: confusion, judgment, or the assumption that something must be wrong. But what if that assumption is too shallow? What if not missing people isn't a lack of feeling, but a different way the mind learned to stay safe? Some people genuinely care, connect, and even love. Yet when someone leaves the room, the city, or their life for a while, nothing aches. No longing, no emotional pull. Life just continues. To outsiders, it looks cold. To partners, it can feel like rejection. To the person experiencing it, it often feels neutral or strangely calm. And that calm is what's most misunderstood. Because for many Americans who say, "I don't miss anyone," it isn't about not valuing people. It's about how closeness, distance, and vulnerability were wired long before they had words for it. The real question isn't why they don't miss. It's what their nervous system learned to do instead. When you look closer, this pattern often starts quietly, without drama. For many people in the US, emotional independence was praised early. You learn to handle things on your own. You learn not to rely too much, not to need too much, not to feel too much. Over time, missing someone begins to feel unnecessary, even uncomfortable. The absence of another person doesn't register as loss. It registers as space, and space feels safer. Some Americans describe it like this: they know someone matters to them, but that knowledge stays intellectual. It doesn't turn into longing. When a friend moves away, when a partner travels, when contact fades, there's no emotional drop. No sense of something missing from the day. Just continuity. This often confuses the people around them. Partners might ask, "Don't you miss me?" Friends might read the distance as disinterest. But internally, the person isn't trying to pull away. They simply don't experience connection through absence. Presence matters. Memory doesn't pull the same weight. What's happening beneath that calm is usually not indifference, it's protection. For some, missing someone triggers vulnerability, sadness, dependence, the risk of wanting something you can't control. And the mind quietly decides that it's easier not to go there at all. Instead of feeling loss, it flattens the emotional curve. Instead of longing, it chooses neutrality. This is especially common in people with avoidant attachment patterns, which are widely documented in American psychology. These individuals often value autonomy above all else. Distance feels regulating. Too much closeness feels intrusive. And separation doesn't activate panic, it brings relief. They don't fall apart when someone leaves. They reorganize. But here's where it gets more complex. Not missing anyone doesn't always mean the absence of attachment. Sometimes it means attachment was never allowed to deepen in the first place. Emotional closeness stayed just below the threshold where loss would hurt. And that threshold is usually set early. For many Americans, that threshold was shaped in childhood without anyone naming it. Growing up in homes where emotions were dismissed, rushed, or quietly mocked teaches a simple lesson: don't linger in feelings. If comfort wasn't consistent, if goodbyes happened often, if adults came and went emotionally or physically, the nervous system adapts. It learns that attachment is temporary. And when attachment feels temporary, missing someone becomes pointless. Some people learn this through constant moving, others through divorce, others through parents who were present but emotionally unavailable. In each case, the message lands the same way: don't lean too hard, don't get too attached, don't expect anyone to stay in a way that costs you emotionally. So instead of grieving absences, the mind skips that step entirely. In American culture, especially for men, there's another layer. Expressing longing is often coded as weakness. Missing someone means admitting dependence. And dependence doesn't align with the values many people were raised on: self-sufficiency, emotional control, not needing anyone too much. Over time, "I don't miss anyone" becomes not just a feeling, but an identity. What's interesting is how this shows up in relationships. People who don't miss others often function well when they're together with someone. They can be attentive, present, even deeply caring. But when distance appears, their emotional world doesn't follow. Long-distance relationships feel manageable. Time apart feels normal. Silence doesn't create anxiety. To their partners, this can feel confusing or painful. One person experiences absence as loss. The other experiences it as neutrality or even relief. And neither is lying. Sometimes, though, there's a quiet contradiction. A person may insist they don't miss anyone, yet become irritable during separations, or restless, or emotionally flat in ways they don't notice. The body carries tension the mind refuses to label as longing. The feeling is there, it's just unnamed. And that's where the line between personality and protection begins to blur. At this point, it helps to slow down and separate two very different realities that often get mixed together. Some people truly have a stable, autonomous way of relating. They don't feel intense longing, but they still experience warmth, curiosity, care, and emotional depth. They may not miss people sharply, yet they feel connected in quieter ways. For them, not missing anyone isn't a problem. It's simply how closeness works. But for others, I don't miss anyone sits next to something heavier. There's often a general emotional flattening. Joy feels muted. Empathy takes effort. Life moves forward, but without much texture. Relationships exist, yet none feel deeply anchoring. And underneath the calm, there's sometimes a vague sense of emptiness that doesn't have a clear source. In those cases, the absence of missing isn't freedom, it's distance from one's own emotional life. American psychologists often notice that when people say they don't miss anyone, the more important question isn't about others at all. It's about whether they allow themselves to feel emotionally moved by people, moments, or loss. Because missing someone isn't just about attachment. It's about letting yourself register that something mattered. When that registration never happens, the world becomes easier to manage, but harder to feel. And yet, this isn't a story about something being broken. Most people who don't miss anyone aren't cold or unloving. They adapted. They learned a version of emotional survival that worked when they needed it. Distance became regulation. Neutrality became safety. Control replaced longing. The problem only appears when that strategy outlives its purpose. When relationships start to feel shallow. When connection feels optional rather than nourishing. When the idea of needing someone feels more threatening than being alone. At that point, the work isn't about forcing yourself to miss people. It's about gently noticing where closeness stops feeling safe and why. And sometimes just recognizing that I don't miss anyone is a pattern, not a personality flaw, is the first moment something inside begins to soften. That doesn't mean longing suddenly appears. It means choice does. The final thing most people never consider is that missing someone isn't a requirement for love, but it is a signal of emotional permission. When people allow themselves to miss, they're allowing absence to matter. They're letting the nervous system register connection without immediately shutting it down. And for those who learned early that attachment leads to pain, that permission can feel far more dangerous than distance ever did. So when someone says, I don't miss anyone, it's worth listening past the words. Sometimes it means, I learned how to be okay on my own. Sometimes it means, I learned not to need. And sometimes it means, I never learned what it feels like to let someone be that important. None of these are moral failures. They're adaptations. In American culture, where independence is praised and emotional restraint is often rewarded, this pattern can go unnoticed for years. Life functions. Relationships exist. Nothing is obviously wrong. And yet, something quietly stays untouched. The goal isn't to force longing or to romanticize pain. It's to notice whether distance feels chosen or compulsory, whether emotional neutrality feels freeing or limiting. Because the ability to miss someone isn't about suffering. It's about allowing yourself to feel that connection leaves a trace. And if it doesn't, the question isn't who you're missing. It's what you learn to protect. That's the psychology behind people, who don't miss anyone.